Welcome to JAT Chat, presented by the Journal of Athletic Training, the official journal of the National Athletic Trainers Association. I'm Dr. Tom Campbell, an assistant professor in the Elmer College of Health Sciences at Old Dominion University, and your host for today's JAT Chat. Today I'm joined with Dr. Jacob Resch and Dr. John MacKnight, authors of the study titled Leveraging the Enhanced Sports as a Laboratory Assessment Model to Cross-Validate a Formula Used to Predict Clinical Recovery from Concussion in Collegiate Athletes, which is featured in the January issue of the Journal of Athletic Training. Dr. Jacob Resch is an associate professor in the University of Virginia's Department of Kinesiology and is faculty within the Master of Science in Athletic Training and Sports Medicine programs. Dr. Resch is also a co-director of the Exercise and Sports Injury Laboratory, an executive committee member of the Brain Injury and Sport Concussion Institute, and a co-PI of the Limbic Military and Tactical Athlete Research Study. Dr. Resch's research evaluates current and novel clinical measures of concussion that are used to assess young and adult athletes immediately following injury and throughout recovery. Dr. John MacKnight is a fellow of the ACSM and has been a professor in internal medicine at the University of Virginia Health System for 30 years. Similarly, he has served as the medical director and head team physician at the University of Virginia for 27 years. Dr. MacKnight completed his undergraduate degree at the University of Delaware and his medical degree at Jefferson Medical College. Dr. MacKnight completed his residency in internal medicine at UVA, followed by a primary care sports medicine fellowship at UNC Chapel Hill. Jake and John, thank you very much for joining me today.
Our pleasure.
Pleasure to be here.
So to kick us off, this work is built around the Enhanced SLAM framework, which emphasizes point-of-care data and clinician research partnership. Can you explain how the Enhanced SLAM shaped the way this study was designed and what it allowed you to do that more traditional research models might not?
Yeah, so the Enhanced Sports Laboratory Assessment Model is actually a take on a model that was born at the University of Virginia in the late 80s, really underneath the pioneering work of our senior author, Dr. Jeffrey Barth. And so what this model really demonstrates is that point of care data collection and really a collaboration between our research team and sports medicine, with Dr. MacKnight's leadership and our exceptional athletic trainers at the University of Virginia. It allows us not only to capture data post-injury, but also before injury to get this idea of true clinical recovery, but even allowing us for point-of-care data collection from a moment of injury on the sideline and following an athlete throughout the time that they experience the signs and symptoms of a concussion. And once they return to normal limits on all of our clinical measures, as we talked about within our manuscript, and then follow them back into sport. And so I think this model really does a couple things. And one, it allows us to demonstrate this point-of-care data collection, the strong collaboration between our medical staff, our sports medicine staff, as well as our research team, but allows us this really unique opportunity to capture data almost in real time of our athletes at the moment a concussion is suspected, then confirmed and diagnosed, and then tracking them throughout recovery.
Awesome. Yeah, I really love that aspect of it. I really do think it adds to the clinical relevance of your study and research in general. One of the things that I think is hard right now for a lot of clinicians to see is that the research that is being done can be applicable to them. And I think this is a perfect example of that.
Sure. So, lots of different institutional variations with regard to how concussions are evaluated and managed, and a lot of places sort of siloed so that the clinical care belongs to the clinicians and the research work belongs to the researchers, and there often isn't a lot of collaboration between the two. And I think what the SLAM model and what the evidence in this paper really nicely show is that our collaborative efforts together to be getting data points on our injured kids every single day, and the impact that that's going to have on how we are able to best manage them and influence their care in a favorable way, not only has really enhanced the clinical experience, and I think has really allowed us to do a top-notch job in managing our student athletes and getting them back on the field safely, but also is our clinical work is then augmenting our researchers' ability to make those correlations between their findings and the sort of the clinical translation over with regard to recovery from concussion, and helping to advance the field. And I'm hoping that and Jake and his staff have done wonderful work in this area for many years. But I think the two of us together really allow us to advance the field in this area much more efficiently than either one of us as a separate group.
Fantastic. I love to see that relationship. So this study focused on cross-validating a previously published prognostic formula rather than creating a new one. What motivated you to take that approach?
Yeah, to be honest, it was really twofold. One, uh, a lot of stuff is published, whether it's rehabilitation protocols or prognostic prediction formulas, but yet they're never cross-validated with independent samples. In fact, they're published, but yet they're just kind of put out into the ether, and we don't really know what comes of them. And can the findings be replicated with a separate sample, whether it's at the same institution or a different institution? So, for example, when we published our original study, that was pulling data from a couple of different sites. At the University of Virginia, based on this point of care data collection model, we're able to, over a period of years, collect a number of athletes or participants in order to actually cross-validate something to say, well, we published this back several years ago. Does this still hold, or is it actually improved over time? So I think the first part of there is to say, well, let's not let this formula just drift off into the ether, but instead let's cross-validate to see if it actually is clinically useful or not. One of the things that we hold very true, I think, the University of Virginia, is the research that we do. We like to be clinically relevant. We want to make sure that we're doing research that we can hand off to our clinicians and say this is actually beneficial or not, and get their insight about this as well. So again, cross-validation is really important. The second piece is to think about the special theme of this issue is this point of care data collection, which I really don't think is possible when if you don't have that relationship between your sports medicine team and the research team working together hand in hand. And I think when thinking about the ideas around this issue, is this a methods paper? Is this an original research article? It's actually both, right? It's a matter of saying, yes, this is an important clinical research question. On the separate side of this, we can demonstrate how researchers and clinicians can work together to implement this type of research design, but then also successfully perform a study. Now, we're not the first to do it. There have been actually several other groups that do similar models. I think the CARE Consortium is a good example of this. However, this has been something that has been put in clinical practice again for several years, and it's only evolved over time. And with the evolution of this over time, it's a matter of saying, with our SLAM model that we have in play at the University of Virginia, every year we meet with our sports medicine staff and say what's working, what's not working, well, what are we thinking about to advance our protocol? Are we good where we are? And I think those are conversations, again, that are part of that point of care data collection, so we can make sure that what we're proposing is actually clinically feasible and it's actually beneficial, as opposed to, well, we're really not quite sure what this is adding to our clinical care of our athletes on a day-to-day basis. So in sum, we want to cross-validate a formula. And the second piece of that is to really emphasize the methodology of this study to say, this is how we can effectively work with our sports medicine team.
I would say, Jake, you really, from a point of care data collection standpoint, appreciating that, concussions don't happen in the office, right? They're happening, away from here. They're happening on fields. They're happening on weekends and the like. And so I think if you, with all of the little nuances for concussion management and all the little intricate pieces of data that you want to have to help make the best assessment of the individual that you are looking at in that point in time, you have to have everybody sort of working together, because if concussion happens on the West Coast on a road trip that's going to be 3 or 4 days long, then that individual, the athletic trainer, and their staff is going to be the primary individual to do those assessments and get those data points up front, which will have the prognostic value moving forward. And so they are our eyes and ears. And so to really be able to cover all of the circumstances where these injuries occur, and then to be able to consistently get the data that you need, to plug into a model like this. Again, you have to have those groups collaboratively working together, and that's what makes it fun. It's a team effort, and we're able then to amass all the info we need in a very consistent way with each case.
And one of the things that John alluded on is when our ATs are away on a road trip or whatnot, one of the unique aspects about our authorship is every author that's on this article contributed to the development of the SLAM over a period of 10 plus years. And so one of the co-authors, Dr. Kat Donahue, actually made our program the enhanced program with our QR code based system, where we're able to have our athletic trainers scan a QR code and do that systematic assessment and click submit. And from that point forward, that data is automatically inputted into our database. So we're able to then leverage that capacity to do research with point of care data collection from a moment of concussion suspected, again, all the way through that return to sport decision.
That's fantastic. Good shout out to Kat. Nice job. All right. So the formula itself is pretty specific. Total symptom severity plus the duration of 4 specific symptoms, and they were drowsiness, neck pain, nervousness, and tingling. So first off, why those symptoms? And then after seeing these results, do you think that those are still the right ones to focus on?
Yeah, so the formula itself in this paper is a cross-validation formula, right? So it's an idea that this formula has been published several years ago, and that formula is originally based on the inputs from impacts neurocognitive indices and total symptom severity, the sensory organization test equilibrium score and its sensory ratios. And then we threw in the total symptom severity and duration of the 22 items of the revised head injury scale. And that original formula I was shocked that we didn't have any inputs from a commonly used computerized neurocognitive test called IMPACT. We did it with the exception of the total symptom severity score. And then the SOT was not part of the final formula. Rather, it was largely based on total symptom severity, which, Tom, you can appreciate is the #1 predictor of recovery after concussion. But then the duration of these 4 symptoms, and it's the duration of these symptoms over a 24-hour period. And I thought that was really unique because 2 things. One, it makes it really clinically applicable because really when it comes down to it, you need a sheet of paper. You don't need a subscription to a computerized neurocognitive test. You don't need a $130,000 balance unit. Now it's like $180,000, but still, it really gets it down to not just the severity of the symptoms an athlete is endorsing, but it's also how long are they experiencing them over a period of time. And I think that's really unique because if we can reduce the amount of time an athlete's experiencing these symptoms, we could potentially move the needle closer to more of a typical recovery or a shorter recovery after concussion. So you mentioned some of those symptoms like neck pain and tingling. Well, maybe it's not neck pain associated with the concussion per se, but the mechanism of the injury that can be treated. And that then can reduce the tingling an athlete may be experiencing. Or with the drowsiness, again, there's a lot of emphasis about sleep hygiene right now, especially before and after concussion. What can we do better as clinicians in order to treat those symptoms? And then finally, with the anxiousness, anxiety is a modifier of recovery. What can we do to better educate our athletes and their coaches and others around the athlete to provide them a sense of calm around their injury, especially when concussions can be really quite scary, but they don't have to be. So, I think your first question is the formula is really derived from this original paper, and we found very similar findings to that original paper based on this exact same amount of independent variables. The second piece is, are these still the variables we should be looking at? I do think we're at a point where we can start adding more, and we actually have a separate study that's taking into account duration of sleep, the number of hours of sleep, the Tampa scale kinesiophobia, looking at kinesiophobia, another kind of indirect measure of anxiety, and this idea of, am I ready to return to sport after my injury? So I think with the advancement of research, we should absolutely look at different variables, but I think one of the things that we will be a kind of a staple moving forward is this idea of not just the severity in the moment of a symptom, but the duration of which someone's experiencing that symptom over the last 24 hours. John, do you have any?
Yeah, well, I think what we've learned over time, I was thinking, and this is what I tell the student athletes when we see them. Standard concussion, headache, nausea, dizziness. They're going to have 90% of our kids are going to have at least one of those clinical features, but that doesn't have a lot of prognostic value to us. That helps us make the diagnosis in that moment in association with a head trauma or a concerning impact. But the features that we highly associate with the likelihood that it will take them longer to recover are going to be the things that Jake just touched base on. Neck pain, cervical myofascial things with muscle tension headaches as opposed to headache that's necessarily associated with a concussion, mental health concerns, anxiety being represented by the nervousness there, but also the other mental health features that may be a part of their medical history, learning needs, baseline anxiety and depression before the injury, attention deficit disorder, those sorts of things, important. Sleep disruption, really significant contributor. I would say that from my experience clinically, that's probably the number one component post-concussion that tends to make symptoms linger longer when the kids have really significant sleep disruption and their brain just does not have good restorative ability to kind of settle down. So intuitively, I think to incorporate those into the equation makes sense from a prognostic standpoint. Now, obviously, that's the reason to validate is to see if that actually plays out and has the predictive value that you would suspect. But I think those component parts are the pieces that we tend to pay most attention to. The last one would be oculovestibular dysfunction for sure. So I think it's cool to see the evolution of how many pieces of neurologic function we look at now, cognitive function, and so forth, relative to back when I started, where it was basically the SAC and early days of the modified VAS, and that was about it. And so now to have all of these other nuanced pieces of information, super helpful.
Yeah. To wrap it up, Tom, I think when you look at the formula, it makes sense, right? And that's really cool from a researcher standpoint. I mean, it's not. It was really interesting to see how many variables were excluded from the original formula. But when you look at the final formula, total symptom severity and the duration of these factors that John highlighted, to me, it not only makes sense, but you can also do something about those. You can intervene upon those. If you see someone has elevated levels of anxiousness, or if they are experiencing some cervicogenic symptoms, we could treat those, right? And I think that's promising to even have a starting point to work with an athlete to say, okay, we have moved past this wait and see aspect of concussion into a point where we're doing interventions and through vestibular therapy or exercise or different treatments for musculoskeletal issues related to the mechanism of injury, maybe not directly related to concussion. But it just makes sense that we have some starting points where we can actually start moving to some identifiable factors that can be treatable for at least collegiate athletes. Whether this holds up in our younger athletes or not, that's a separate study, but still it's a formula in itself that makes sense.
Awesome. And I think it just points more to the clinical relevance. So this is fantastic. Mm-hmm. So you're very clear in this paper that this equation shouldn't replace clinical judgment. So thinking about this practically, if I'm a clinician seeing an athlete within 24 to 48 hours of a concussion, how would you actually recommend using this information?
It's nice to have a rough kind of prognostic sense up front. I mean, once you've made the diagnosis from the clinical features that they have, and you're going to get all of your baseline information, so you know what you're working with, and then I think particularly here, in the sports world, I mean, everything is so pressured with regard to return to play, and from day one, really thinking about what is the likelihood that this individual will be able to return in X amount of time, what is their recovery path look like, and then of course what can we be doing proactively to assist with any features that are modifiable, as Jake said. So up front, I mean, the management is going to be the same, right? It's cognitive rest, it's physical rest for a couple of days, it's then initiation of symptom limited exercise, it's restoration of return to learn, it's all of those things. But I think superimposed on your sense right up front of like what is the time frame that this person, with their initial presentation based on symptom severity and then a few of these other features, what's the time frame that we're thinking about from a standpoint of their recovery? And obviously, you treat the patient, you're not treating the test, you're not treating the equation. And so, that it may be quite an accurate reflection of where the natural history of that concussion is going to go. It may not be. I mean, everybody is a little bit different. I think that's the huge challenge in concussion management, is just such a heterogeneous process, and even in a given individual, their individual concussions may be very different based on mechanism and relative intensity of impact and all those sorts of things. But I think it is helpful right up front, both as the clinician and then to be able to share with the patient to say, hey, prognostically, although I don't have a crystal ball, the features that you have, may suggest that this is going to take longer. And I think although the student athletes are disappointed to hear that, on the other hand, I think they do appreciate the reality of that and being a realist and not trying to be an idealist, and simply giving them a framework to say, look, pal, I do not anticipate that this is going to be gone in the next 5 days. Like, you have way too many symptoms and you have some of these other features that are a little more problematic. You're going to be fine, and we're going to do all the right things to try to get you there. But realistically, this is probably an injury that's going to take you a little more time, perhaps, than what you had last time, or than what one of your teammates may have had. So that, to me, that's the value. I mean, the management otherwise is going to be exactly the same, and you're treating the kid, and you're following all the parameters that you would already be doing as part of your concussion protocol. But I do think there's tremendous value to at least laying out reasonable expectations.
Yeah, especially when your expectations, and this goes into a limitation of the formula. So the athletes in this study had a relatively short recovery period, and we had some individuals that recovered beyond 14 days, but the bulk of the athletes did have a shorter recovery period. And so that leads to this question about the values that we found and where the formula is really good. And so the formula itself is pretty good at identifying athletes that recovered during a shorter period of time, but it also identifies individuals that recover over a longer period of time, but it loses its specificity. So it loses its ability to say, well, maybe it's predicting 19 days. Well, it actually could have been 28 days. But the idea that John just hit on is saying you may not have that typical recovery. You might have a longer recovery. And I think that provides that insight for the clinician to say, well, what additional supports do we need for this athlete? Being more heavy-handed with academic adjustments right away, or maybe seeing a sports psychologist to talk about concern around the injury, or to enhance our ability to educate about concussion for maybe not even just the athlete, but maybe the coaches as well, to set realistic expectations. Because the last thing we want to do is say, well, it looks great, we'll see it in 7 to 10 days, but the athlete is actually predicted to have a longer recovery. So I think the formula helps identify some potential points of intervention, but as John so eloquently said, really helps you set realistic expectations for the different stakeholders that are involved.
Yeah, and I love the two statements that you gave there, John. Treat the patient, not the test, and be a realist, not an idealist. I think that's so important for many clinicians in general, but more specifically our young listeners as well.
Does the Journal of Athletic Training have the ability to make a T-shirt that says that? That's not idealist. I mean, that actually sounds like a T-shirt in the making.
Yep, I love it. There's your $1 million idea. Yeah. All right, so if there's one takeaway that you hope clinicians and researchers can walk away with after reading this paper, what would it be?
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned earlier, this is a couple of things. One, it's a methodology paper, and the second piece of this is it's an original research article where we're able to implement the methodology to execute a study. And I think I'm very fortunate, very blessed to be here at the University of Virginia and work with individuals like Dr. MacKnight, the rest of the sports medicine team, have exceptional athletic trainers and physical therapists that work with us that allow for the sport as a laboratory assessment model to work. I do think it's always been a negotiation. It wasn't just my way. It wasn't just their way. It was this meeting in the middle. And it's taken time. When I started at the University of Virginia, it took a good 6 months to get things up and going. And then from that point, let's make this work. And I think that's been the mentality from the sports medicine team as well as our research team. And I have exceptional doctoral students that are testing athletes almost every day of the week. From a baseline assessment to a post-injury assessment, that's all part of this model. So I could sit here and say that the most important thing about this article is saying we did find similar findings that we found back when we published our original study. So in essence, we did cross-validate the formula, which some figures look really flattering and others are not so flattering. But I really do think the point-of-care data collection, the how to work successfully with the sports medicine team, to me is really what we try to emphasize with this particular manuscript. I feel like it's unique, but it's almost for me like a blueprint. Well, like, how do we get this started at another institution? but also to understand the value it has for the sports medicine team, but also for the research staff as well.
One last thing. So at the very end of this article, there was a very nice tribute to another one of your colleagues. Can you just touch on that briefly?
Yeah, so as I mentioned in I think it was your first question, is Dr. Jeffrey Barth, Dr. Donna Broszek, and others created this system called the Sport as a Laboratory Assessment Model back in the late 80s. I think I was like 9 when this was first created. John was 11.
I was in high school.
Yeah.
In high school.
So the idea here is that Dr. Jeffrey Barth was a giant amongst the sport neuropsychology world, but also the concussion world. And we were so fortunate to have him contribute to this. And I couldn't think of a bigger honor to have him as a senior author for this manuscript. But unfortunately, during this time, Dr. Barth passed, which left this moment of appreciation amongst everybody involved with this manuscript to appreciate this might be his final contribution to the literature related to sport as a laboratory assessment model, but also a way to say this is something that was created in the late 80s, is still going strong today, but also what a great way to pay a tribute to what he left behind, his legacy of saying this model can be used for not only athletes, but non-athletes alike, military personnel, etc. So at the end of this article, and I know this is kind of an unusual or unique aspect to an original research article, we were afforded the opportunity to have a tribute to Dr. Barth, and Dr. Broszek also was pretty heavy-handed with that section, because we wanted to make sure it was right. We wanted to make sure they were paying respect where respect was due. And also to say, Tom, to be absolutely honest, without the sport as a laboratory assessment model, what I was born and raised on as a PhD, my research would look markedly different. And how we would look at concussion as a whole would look markedly different without Dr. Barth's insight on that. So that's my limited perspective on that. John, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, so, you hope in your professional career that you have the opportunity to work with giants in their field. And Jeff Barth was a giant in his field. He built the foundation that modern concussion management has been built upon. And one of the most genuinely nice, classy, incredibly brilliant gentlemen that I've ever had the opportunity to meet and work with. And I'm so thankful that I had that opportunity and to collaborate in any way with him and with Donna Broszek and then all of the folks that have followed thereafter, including my good friend here, Jake. Professional highlight. So a fitting tribute to him and all that he stood for, both professionally but also as just as a great human being. So we miss him.
Yeah, I think what John said about him being nice, I think there's an adage, people want to know about how much you care before they care about how much you know, and I couldn't think of a better statement to fit Dr. Barth.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's phenomenal. It was a great tribute, and I can attest to say that it has branched out from University of Virginia. As a fellow concussion researcher, I've adopted the enhanced plan model here as well. So I am forever grateful for that as well. Well, Jake and John, thank you for joining me today. For our listeners, the article is available free of charge from the Journal of Athletic Training. I highly recommend everyone go and download this manuscript from the journal. Again, thank you so much, and we will see you next time on JAT Chat.
And be looking for your Be a Realist, Not an Idealist t-shirt on the Journal of Athletic Training homepage.